For our Thom Hartmann Book Club excerpt today, we're reading from Ed Morales' new book, Fantasy Island, Colonialism, Exploitation, and the Betrayal of Puerto Rico. This is from the first chapter. There was never any doubt that the United States wanted Puerto Rico for its own when it began a war with Spain near the turn of the 20th century. Cuba had been in the throes of independence war with Spain off and on since 1868, and the conflict that began in 1895 seemed ripe for the United States to capitalize on. The sinking of the USS Maine, an American naval ship destroyed by an explosion while moored just outside Havana, fueled American entry into the war. Although there are conflicting theories about the source of the explosion, including the likelihood it was caused by a spontaneous internal fire, William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain blew up the incident into the perfect catalyst for the United States to enter the conflict. When Theodore Roosevelt entered the fray with his army of Rough Riders, the whole affair came as no surprise to anyone who'd been paying attention to the lust U.S. government leaders and military had long expressed to expand southward and westward. And although the idea of manifest destiny was at the forefront of the political discourse of this period, it's less often observed that the United States' expansionist gaze was saturated with racial language and attitudes, at once desirous of and repelled by Latin America's mestizo mulatto social dynamic. The Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th created a U.S. obsession with both Cuba and Puerto Rico because of the potential of a similar black-led revolt on those islands. In 1826, Virginia Senator John Randolph feared that such a revolt would render the southern United States vulnerable to invasion from Cubans in rowboats. For this reason, he objected to the United States participating in the 1826 Panama Congress because American diplomats would have to endure the horror of a U.S. diplomat taking his seat in the Congress, quote, beside the native African, their American descendants, the mixed breeds, the Indians, and the half-breeds, without any offense or scandal at so motley a mixture, end quote. The logic driving this perspective underlined not only the importance of slavery to the emergence of capitalism in the 19th century, but also, as Matthew Karp points out in this vast southern empire, the extent to which slave owners and their elected representatives disproportionately shaped U.S. foreign policy. Going back as far as the Haitian Revolution, fear of a successful slave rebellion in the newly formed United States strongly motivated Southern politicians. As Karp mentions, to that end, Presidents Madison and Monroe, quote, used overwhelming force to destroy black maroon settlements in southern Florida, end quote. Fear of slave rebellions also briefly united the interests of American slaveholders and Cuban elites who wanted independence from Spain, but in the late 19th century, after abolition, Roosevelt's forces fought in conjunction with Afro-Cuban armies against their common Spanish foe. The move to wrest Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain came just as Spain had finally relented to end slavery as a concession to black rebel Cuban armies that had formed to push for independence. In a further move to placate continued unrest on the island, in November 1897, Spain signed automatic charters for Cuba and Puerto Rico, which gave limited home rule governments to both islands. Puerto Rico would gain full representation in the Cortes, the Spanish parliament, and could veto Spanish commercial treaties unfavorable to them while also retaining the rights to set tariffs on imports and exports. In this way, Puerto Ricans were granted a kind of citizenship that allowed self-government grafted on what was left of their Spanish subjecthood. Yet on July 25, 1898, 8 days after the first meeting of the newly formed Puerto Rican Parliament, U.S. troops arrived in the southern port of Guanica and replaced the Spanish flag with the stars and stripes. This date would be remembered over 50 years later when the United States finally followed through on a project to allow Puerto Ricans to have limited autonomy and self-government. But at the time, it was both the end of Teddy Roosevelt's splendid little war and the beginning of the current quandary over what exactly Puerto Rico's new colonial master would do with the island. Although historians agree that there was no pre-existing plan for designating Puerto Rico's status, there was a general belief that Puerto Rico could be incorporated as a U.S. territory and probably would be. This led many to assume that it would follow a similar path to statehood as former territories like Florida and Louisiana. At the very least, it would, by acceding to military control, receive, quote, the advantages and blessings of enlightened civilization, end quote, as Puerto Rico's first military governor, Nelson A. Miles, declared 3 days after the landing of Guanica. Because Cuba was so militarized during its wars for independence, the United States decided to allow it national sovereignty, thinking it could still exert considerable control over the economy because of existing business interests and a ready-made set of Cuban consumers who were already buying Ford Model Ts. But although Puerto Rico had experienced anti-Spanish uprisings in the mid-19th century, in 1898 they did not have nearly the same level of armed mobilization.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. We've got a lot going on today. It's some extraordinary news, such big news that I published a second rant over at Hartmann Report this morning, just with the breaking news that Tucker Carlson and Viktor Orban are together in Hungary. They're doing Tucker's show this week from Hungary, the country that has created the template for how to destroy democracy in a constitutional republic. I'm going to dig in and do a deep dive into that in the second hour of our program. Also in the second hour, Charles Sauer is going to be with us telling us how America's infrastructure should be from a libertarian point of view. And Alan Minsky, the executive director of Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org, is going to be with us about what PD America is up to. That's going to be fascinating. And at the bottom of this hour, Mikey Weinstein is going to drop by. He's the founder and president of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. All of this ties into my main rant for the day, which is titled "A Warrior's Instant Pass to Heaven Would Be Cultural Poison for America," over at HartmannReport.com. And here's the essence of it. Louise and I started a month or so ago. We started, binge watching old history shows. We started out with The Crown, the pseudo history of the contemporary British royal family, and then we went to the White Queen, and then to the Red Queen, and then to the the Spanish Princess, and then to the Vikings. And then to the Tudors, and now we're watching the Vikings. And the thing about the Vikings that, which was originally done for the History Channel in Canada the first year, it's kind of the first season is kind of stilted. But then the characters really kind of come alive, because what happens was it really took off and got taken over by some people who really know how to make movies, apparently. And warning, it's insanely violent. But basically, what it shows is that this one little tiny cultural story, this one little tiny story embedded deep inside our culture, is the thing that has allowed, or that did allow, the Vikings to basically seize Europe. I mean, they were regularly taking over chunks of England, or the United Kingdom. They took Paris. I mean, they didn't just take France, they took Paris. They got all the way down into the Mediterranean and took Sicily. I mean, these guys were crazed. And the one little cultural twist story that enabled them to do this, that was not part of the primary culture and religion of the Europeans at the time, was this belief that the fastest way to get to heaven, the Vikings called it Valhalla, the fastest way to get there was to die in battle, killing other people. Now, I mean, we've fought wars, and you have ministers go out in the field with the troops and pray for them and all that kind of thing. My dad signed up for World War II at the time that the kamikaze pilots were the big threat to the American fleet, because they believed that if they died in battle, they would be instantly transported to the Shinto heaven, or the whatever the emperor, however he had reinvented the old Bushido, the old samurai warriors code of conduct, which said if you die in war, you go immediately to heaven. And so this is this is an extraordinarily potent meme to insert into a country's religion and culture. And when you do, the country changes from being what we call civilized to being what we call barbarous. A more contemporary example, you know, we were all sitting around making fun of the 19 guys who crashed the airplanes on 9/11, saying that, you know, they're going to get 72 virgins and all, you know, and there were all these jokes about the 72 virgins. Because they believed that. Now, that kind of belief that if you die in battle, you go immediately to heaven, is in contemporary Islam an outlier. But it was bin Laden's outlier. Bin Laden had convinced his little band of followers, at the time we invaded Afghanistan, the best guess was about 20,000 people had gone through his training camps, and he had about 5,000 hardcore followers. The numbers are obviously much larger now because of our invasion. But he had convinced these guys, if you die attacking, you know, the heathens, the Americans, you immediately go to heaven. And as a result, we got 9/11. You had, I mentioned the kamikaze pilots. This was the main belief of the Vikings. And now I'm seeing, and in fact, I'm going to have to update my article, but probably during the break at the bottom of the hour. But I'm seeing over at Raw Story now, one of the top stories. This is absolutely shocking. The headline, "Good Way to Die. An AR-15 worshiping Mooney sect mobilized for January 6th is recruiting the far right to its apocalyptic vision." Right? I mean, I wrote this op-ed yesterday afternoon and finished it up this morning without knowing that the Moonies were actually, or this is apparently the son of Reverend Moon. I've got to more carefully read the article. But it is saying, you know, it's a good way to die. Trying to end democracy. And it's frankly not a good way to die. I don't think you immediately get transported to heaven. But we have used this, we being Western civilization, Western culture, Christianity, we have used this in the past. In 1095, on November 27th, Pope Urban gave one of history's most famous speeches. He was speaking to the French warriors. He was sending them off to fight in Jerusalem, to seize Jerusalem from the Muslims at the time. And he said, "God will lead them, for they are doing his work. There will be absolution and remission of sins for all who die in the service of Christ. Here they are poor and miserable sinners. There they will be rich and happy." And what came out of that? Well, Raymond of Agiles, who was there, wrote an eyewitness account of what happened when those people who believed that if they died in battle, they would go immediately to heaven. Christians. What happened? He said, quote, "Some of our men cut off the heads of their enemies. Others shot them with arrows so that they fell from the towers. Others tortured them longer by casting them into the flames. Piles of heads, hands, and feet were to be seen in the streets of the city. It was necessary to pick one's way over the bodies of men and horses. But these were small matters compared to what happened at the Temple of Solomon, a place where religious services were ordinarily chanted. What happened there? If I tell the truth, it will exceed your powers of belief. So let it suffice to say this much at least, that in the temple and portico of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins." Christians. When you insert this simple little belief that if you die in battle, you go to heaven, into a religion and thus into a culture, the culture ceases to be what we call civilized, ceases to advance in ways that we call civilization, and regresses to barbarism. It regresses back to the 10th century. It, as bin Laden, you know, did with his little merry band in Afghanistan, as is happening in parts of Pakistan right now, as ISIS is doing across the Middle East. This is what you get. And it's a deadly and dangerous thing. And the Republican Party, I'm telling you, by flirting with this stuff, is playing with fire. These are dangerous times. And we have to call this out. We have to highlight this, and we have to wake people the hell up. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is not a good or healthy thing for America. Your thoughts after this break. And welcome back. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind?
Sensei Hartmann, ohayou gozaimashita to you.
Arigatou gozaimashita.
I believe
that's thank you, isn't it?
That's good morning.
No, yeah.
That guy that calls from Washington all the time that always has the morning language.
Yeah. Okay,
thing.
so we're competing on languages. Okay. So what's up, Maverick?
I'm contributing. So, an aside here, if you get 72 virgins, you also get 72 mothers-in-law.
Well, theoretically, maybe the mothers-in-law went to the other place. Who knows?
But what I wanted to contribute to with your topic, you said yesterday and frequently, I think it's Voltaire said, if you can convince someone to believe an absurdity, you can convince them to commit an atrocity.
That's correct.
Voltaire?
It was Voltaire, yes.
Well, that plays out pretty well when you look at, convincing people of the absurdity of a creator deity and an afterlife.
Yeah.
I give you the pogroms. I give you the Salem witch trials. I give you the 9/11 event. I give you the Spanish Inquisition, which no one expected, and I could go on.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, and this is why it's so troubling. And when you combine it with the fact that Tucker Carlson is in Hungary right now.
God, I wish you wouldn't say his name. That hurts me so.
Sorry, Maverick, but it's real, and this is very, very concerning. This is very troubling.
We need to grow out of this, Tom. We need to grow out of this. Hey, look, man, you have a great day, and thanks for your service.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maverick. Good to hear from you. This is very, very, very dangerous stuff. I don't know how to define it beyond that. Patrick in Lakewood, California. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind? You're on the air.
Hi, Tom. It's Patrick in Lakewood. I'm just calling. I was hoping to get your producers. Apparently, DirecTV and Free Speech TV were in the middle of a reboot, so they lost the first 10 minutes of the show. Yeah. I was wondering if you could do a real quick recap of what you said.
Sure. I will do that, Patrick. What I'm talking about is my op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com that when Louise and I have been watching Vikings, and how did the Vikings take over so much of Europe? Well, they believed that if you die in battle, you immediately go to heaven. And this is the most dangerous thing you can insert into a religion or a culture. This is what bin Laden, this was his twist that he inserted into modern day Islam, and it's why those guys were willing to die to make 9/11 happen. It's the twist that the Pope in 1099 inserted into Christianity, which is why people were willing to die in the Crusades and they conquered Jerusalem. It is an extraordinarily dangerous and deadly thing. And we are on the edge now. There's this Mooney pastor, the son of Reverend Moon apparently, who is now talking about how January 6th would have been a good way to die. And Donald Trump is trying to make Ashley Babbitt into one of these martyrs. This is just dangerous, dangerous stuff. Patrick, that's what I'm talking about. Patrick, thank you for the heads up on that, by the way. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 21 minutes past the hour. If you're just joining us, my rant this morning, number one, Mikey Weinstein will be with us at the bottom of the hour about the infiltration of our military by the hard right, the religious right. In our second hour, I'm going to do a deep dive into Viktor Orban and Tucker Carlson, who is in Hungary this week. Oh, my God. And it's downright scary. Charles Sauer is going to drop by in our second hour as well to talk about who should pay for America's infrastructure. And Alan Minsky is going to drop by at the end of our second hour. He's the new executive director of Progressive Democrats of America. Our third hour, we can just, process all this stuff. But my opening rant today is about how when a religion or a culture, and I wrote about this back after 9/11 in this anthology, this book called From the Ashes, A Spiritual Response to the Attack on America. I wrote a piece, Pope John Paul II submitted a piece, Thich Nhat Hanh had a piece in there, the Dalai Lama had a piece in there, and then a bunch of people like me who are just, much lower profile folks. And what I wrote about at that time, this was after 9/11, was how bin Laden had embedded this belief that if you die in the service of violence, in the service of killing bad guys, you go to heaven. And that was the thing that enabled 9/11. That was what made al-Qaeda so dangerous. This is what ISIS believes right now. This is the dividing line. There's a very thin dividing line between civilization and barbarity. And the thing that determines it is a religious belief that if you die killing other people for a noble cause, you immediately go to heaven. And when cultures embrace that belief, they cease to be civilized. And I mean, this is why we refer to that period of time when the popes, there was 300 years that the popes were pushing this, 250 years that the popes were pushing this during the Crusades. And that is what we refer to as the Dark Ages. Barbarism ruled. And I'm seeing this growing, and it concerns me. Lloyd in Framingham, Massachusetts. Hey, Lloyd, thanks for listening on Sirius XM. What's up?
How you doing? You always have a good show.
Thank you.
Always. As a Jewish American and a guy who's 65 years old, I don't really see much of a difference at all. You and I love you. I support you very much. But there is no line. I think the Republican Party actually stepped over that quote-unquote line decades ago. And
when?
I guess you could.
When did the Republican Party start saying that if you die in the service of our cause, you go to heaven?
Well, I guess that's the latest extension of it. But the minute that Nixon took the Southern strategy, that's when they dove into that pool. And
well, that's when they started swimming in that direction. I'll give you that.
Oh, absolutely. And at this point, having seen uncles and aunts with green letters and numbers burnt into their bodies, I don't really see much of a difference between our nation and the Nazi situation because of what we did against Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans in the 1800s, where they just killed an entire villages because, as you have mentioned many times, because they didn't want a culture other than the white culture out there that threatened them.
Well, and look at the horrors of slavery, too. And I write about that in my op-ed, that this was, we've always been dancing very, very close to this edge.
And
the slaughter of Native Americans.
Right. And to get to that final part of the pool where they, incorporate, God and, dying and all of that stuff for the better good of living forever. I mean, I can't think of a time in my life where I didn't see part of that in our culture. I just don't. I mean, it's sad, but I don't see much of a line now. I'm glad it concerns you. I think we're only, of course, nobody knows what tomorrow brings. Nothing would shock me as to, how much deeper we're going to go. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, the fact that, this headline just went up over on Raw Story, and so I have yet to incorporate it into my op-ed today at Hartmann Report. But the fact that the son of Reverend Moon is now talking about honorable deaths in battle is like, oh my God, here we are. My dad told me, who volunteered for World War II, that the kamikaze pilots were the things that everybody feared because they thought that if they died in battle, they went to heaven immediately. It's, Lloyd, you make a very, very good point. Thank you very much for the call. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with Mikey Weinstein, and then we'll continue.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
That guy always steps on me. We'll be back with Mikey Weinstein about what's going on in our military, and then we'll continue this conversation right after that.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to President." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, never again. Each time, never again had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price. Indeed, to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the two governments that had succeeded Bruning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next. How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so, and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So David Perry over at Medium.com put together a list of 38 reasons to investigate the Trump administration. Everything from the Russian influence over the 2016 election to the Trump family's collusion with Russia to Ivanka Trump's trademarks to federal spending at Trump properties to the civilians killed by Trump's drone strikes to the Trump administration's role in turning the United States into the global epicenter for the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we are. Yes, it's grim. Their decision to sideline the CDC, politicizing mask wearing just to try to get himself reelected, the number of people who died because the White House kept PPE from blue states, from Democratic-led states, the contents of the Trump documents that Trump refused to release to the House Judiciary Committee and other committees, all the people who wouldn't speak, at all, ignoring subpoenas, violations of the Hatch Act, the deportation of COVID-positive immigrant families, illegal altering of records. Anyhow, there's a whole list. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And whoops, wrong button here. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Mikey Weinstein. Mikey has been just doing this extraordinary work for many years. He's been on the program many times. It's been a while, though. He's the founder and president of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. MilitaryReligiousFreedom.org is their website. His Twitter handle is Mikey, M-I-K-E-Y, Weinstein, W-E-I-N-S-T-E-I-N. Mikey, welcome back to the program. Can you give us I've been ranting this morning about, what happens when the white nationalists, the hardcore neo-fascists and the far-right Christians get together. You've been documenting their infiltration of our military. What's the latest?
Well, first, Tom, I want to thank you for being here and being the voice, oftentimes, sadly, in the wilderness for so many years. And it has been a while since I've been on. I know we've done the show before, but thank you for the opportunity. I just did an interview with Paul Jay at the Analysis outlet last week, which went everywhere, about this specific thing about the merging of what we call fundamentalist Christian nationalism, which of course includes white supremacy, into what we refer to as the technologically most lethal organization ever created by Homo sapiens, which is our U.S. military. It's always been bad, but during Trump, it was just like somebody handing out cocktails of cancer, metastasizing it as fast as you possibly could. I often refer, Tom, I'm sure, of course, you of all people know the most famous speech by President Eisenhower was his farewell speech, where he warned America and the world about what, Tom?
The military-industrial complex, originally the military-industrial congressional complex in his first draft.
Exactly. They cut out the congressional part right at the end before he said it. But what we fight here at MRFF is nothing less than a fundamentalist Christian parachurch military corporate congressional proselytizing complex. And this concept of Christian nationalism, Christian nationalists are people that hate democracy and want to create a fundamentalist Christian theocracy in its place. They hate our freedoms. It includes massive misogyny. These are the component parts of this: Islamophobia, homophobia, anti-Semitism, and a real hatred of our Constitution, which they want to subordinate to their weaponized version of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it is just so bad. And as I said on the Paul Jay show, if you keep in mind, I think it was something like 7.9% Hitler had actually hardcore people in his National Socialist movement. Stalin had something like 2.8% in Russia. It's our best sense here at the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, for fighting this for the majority of 20 years, that we have somewhere between 28 to 34% of the people in the U.S. military, Tom, who would be classified or could easily be classified as Christian nationalists. That's terrifying when you realize this is where all the nuclear weapons are, the drones, the chemical weapons, the laser-guided weapons. We are probably later this week, we will go over, get this, Tom, 75,000 sailors, soldiers, Marines, and airmen, guardians at the Space Force, Coast Guard, Marines, cadets and midshipmen at the military academies, my alma mater, the Air Force Academy, West Point in Annapolis, and even junior ROTC, OTS, and OCS. And about 95% of our clients are actually Christians themselves that are being persecuted for not being Christian enough. So this is not, as they would say in Apollo 13, Houston, we have a problem. This is very much, Tom, this is Houston, we have a national security threat internally as much as we're facing externally by a resurgent Taliban, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the Mujahideen, and Boko Haram, you name it. But it's right inside of our own military. And it was the Trump-inspired people who are still very much inextricably intertwined into what we call the Pentecostal gun that we are fighting on a daily basis. And that's why I'm so happy to be on with you today, because most people do not know what Christian nationalism is. It's bad enough, Tom, as you know, you've spoken about it when you see it in legislatures or with sewage workers or firefighters or the police or even in public schools. But when you mix it in with the firepower of our U.S. military, it is nothing less than what I said, a terrifying, harrowing national security threat, Tom. The
histories of the Trump era are coming out right now, and one of them pretty much deifies General Milley as the guy who, the military stood against Trump. Trump wanted to use the military. He wanted to, execute a coup or a state of emergency using the military, and they defied him. Is that the exception to the rule? Is the senior brass, are they the ones who are, is there any effort on their part to hold back this tide from within their own ranks?
You know, there was a movie you and I saw called 7 Days in May that came out probably in the early 60s or late 50s about a coup in the American military. I think Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas were in it. I would like to be able to – I think that Milley is probably a good person, but there should have been a more full-throated response to this Reichstag moment, which was talked about. We talked about that on the Paul Jay Show. I would have liked to have seen that. I don't want to upset the senior flag officers, admirals and generals who come to us on almost a daily basis, and the senior executive service members of the civilian DoD Corps, which are at the same level. But it is not – this may surprise you, but probably won't, Tom. We get calls constantly from senior military leaders asking us to intervene in their own organizations because they know that we'll do it with protecting anyone who's calling in for anonymity. And they don't have to, turn into what we call tarantulas on wedding cakes and face horrible, revenge, and retaliation. What bothers me is, MRFF, we are not a line item in the DoD budget, and these people should be standing up. I believe that General Milley and others, again, it should have been a more full-throated response than what we saw. We cannot have our military infected with careerism. There comes a time when doing the right thing means you have to do something objectively. And as Martin Luther King said, at the end of the day, it is not the words of our enemies that we remember, but the silence of our friends, and silence becomes complicity. I don't want to be mean or terribly pejorative to these individuals, but stand the F up. You're in the military. I'm not saying if you're a manager at Boeing or at Costco, but in this case, it's the United States military, and you see what the commander-in-chief is doing or trying to do. Stand the F up and forget about your own career, trajectory. In the case of Milley, he's already the most senior military person there. One of our advisory board members, one of my closest friends, is Larry Wilkerson, and he was the right-hand person to Colin Powell when he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley's job, and when Colin Powell was the Secretary of State. And, I realize Christian nationalism is terrifying. It's everywhere. In fact, they just kicked Paul Jay's link off of YouTube this morning saying that we were passing information that the 2020 election was a fraud when, in fact, it was the largest and most secure election in American history. So we're going to be fighting that. And, Tom, I hope they don't ever do that to the Thom Hartmann Show.
Yeah, me too. But
they better not.
Well, I'm not saying the election was a fraud. Never have. But it seems to me that the most dangerous combination imaginable is this combination of military power and religious power. I was ranting about this in the first part of this hour, where talking about the Crusades, where the Pope, told people, and the papacy continued with this for a couple of hundred years, that if you die in battle, you immediately go to heaven. This was bin Laden's message to his followers, which is why they were willing to crash planes into buildings. This is the message that ISIS and Boko Haram embrace, and Al Qaeda embrace, and it's why their fighters are so difficult to defeat, frankly, because they're not afraid of dying. And I am hopeful that, and now, Ross Story is reporting, and just this morning, just like an hour ago, it just went up, that the son of Reverend Moon is now talking about there's a good way to die, right? Fighting for fascism, fighting against the American way. And are you seeing evidence of this? I mean, that's the most extreme on the merger of religion and military that is conceivable. And every culture in the history of the world that has embraced this idea that if you die killing people, you immediately go to heaven, has flipped from being a civilized culture into a barbarous culture. It's why we call the Dark Ages the Dark Ages. Are you seeing evidence of that kind of thing starting to infiltrate our military?
Not starting. It's been there for a long time. I invite your audience to Google the terms Jesus nukes, as in nuclear weapons, and Jesus rifles, two of our largest stories. I can tell you that the people that we are fighting are trying to use our U.S. military as an accelerant or lubricant to, again, bring their version of weaponized Jesus back. And a lot of them are promised. They talk about it. A 200-mile-long river, 4.5 feet deep, filled with nothing but the blood of those that their version of Jesus is slaughtered at the Battle of Armageddon. And my fear, I've said it for years, is that they're going to try to spark a nuclear incident to accelerate the arrival of their version of Jesus. I know how it sounds, but as I said before, when we took a look at January 6th, it was suddenly as if we at MRFF, Tom, had been suddenly discovered. We've been talking and screaming about this for years. I had so many media people calling me saying, why are we seeing so much military up there? Why are we seeing all the Christian iconography? So that's exactly what we're concerned about, except just to slightly put a different theme on your statement. This isn't sudden. This has been going on really since the early 1990s, and it existed under Bush and Obama, under Clinton, and it just has gone completely crazy under Trump. And we are not seeing the type of ardent opposition that we would like to see from Biden or from General Milley or even from Lloyd Austin. Austin said, I want to be the lodestar for religious and racial diversity in DOD. Secretary Austin, show us. Words are cheap. You got to stand up and do it now. I don't know what more we can do.
Yeah, amen. We're talking with Mikey Weinstein, the founder and president of the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, MRFF. The website is militaryreligiousfreedom.org. On Twitter, Mikey Weinstein. Mikey, we're going to hit a break here in just a second. You want to tell people just a little bit about your organization and where they can find you and how they can reach out to you if they have friends, family in the military that they're concerned about?
Absolutely. We provide our clients AARP, Anonymity, Action, Results of Protection. We don't charge anything. MilitaryReligiousFreedom.org, or my phone number, which is public, 505-250-7727. We also have a toll-free number. We represent, like I said, this week we'll hit 75,000 members of the military. We have over 650 people that work here, paid and volunteers. We've been doing this, fighting this fight since Mel Gibson came out with his wonderful movie, The Passion of the Christ, in February of 2004, or as we call it, the Jesus Chainsaw Massacre, or Freddy versus Jesus. We've been incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit since December of 2005. So we are here to help everybody. You can be completely anonymous, and if you want to help us, you can go to our website, militaryreligiousfreedom.org. Thank you, Tom.
militaryreligiousfreedom.org. Mikey, let's stay in touch and talk more frequently. Thanks so much for dropping by.
Be well, brother. Stay strong.
Thank you. You too. We've got a long way to go and a lot of work to do here. It is 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls right after this. This is serious stuff. This is very, very serious stuff. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Talk Media for the sane among us. Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Rick in Irwin, Tennessee. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
All right, give me about 10, 15 seconds to get this out. So in 1100s, 1182, whatever, they had the Crusades. A couple, 200-300 years later, they had the Inquisition. And after that, they had the Enlightenment. My theory is we're going through the same thing. I think it started with the O.J. Simpson trial, by the way, but we're going through the same thing. We're like in the crusade stage right now, and when these people get power, then we go through the Inquisition stage. And then after that, then maybe we'll come into a new enlightenment. But it's going to be accelerated because of electronic media.
And social media.
Being able to boost your broadcast or whatever they call it nowadays. So it's going to be going off quicker and quicker and quicker. It took, like maybe 700-800 years way back then. It might take 2 or 3 now. I don't know. I mean, I hope it takes longer than that because I'm like 70, knock this thing down 35 or 40 years down the road. It's be fine with me. If you can't stop it now, at least delay it.
Yeah, but I think you're right, later. Rick. The accelerant, the gasoline on the fire, is social media, and it is traveling very, very rapidly. Rick, thank you for the call. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan.
Hi, Tom. I think the idea of egging on people to die for God is part of U.S. foreign policy and military strategy. One very good example of it is in 1980 when Zbigniew Brzezinski was in the Khyber Pass, egging on the Afghan refugees to take back their land, and they will have their homes back one day because God is on their side, and they're right.
Charlie Wilson's war.
Footage, by the way, on YouTube. That's very easy to find.
Yeah.
And Robert Gates had a very good book former defense secretary called From the Shadows, which talks about that time. And he worked with Carter at that time, who essentially started the war in Afghanistan, goaded the Soviets into Afghanistan secretly. And, you know, we've been supporting terrorist groups, the MEK, Mujahideen Khalq, who has a history far back as the Shah and was important during when Saddam was in power as a foil, as a proxy to fight Iran. They were being kept in, protected by the Americans, even though they were on the terrorist list, State Department terrorist list. And for people who don't know this, there are good articles. There's one great one by Seymour Hersh called Our Men in Iran in the New Yorker. Yeah. There's another very good one called The Iranian Group, A Source of Contention in Iraq, which was published in Time in 2009. There's another fairly recent one in The Intercept in March 22nd of 2020 called Defectors Tell of Torture and Forced Sterilization in Militant Iranian Cult. Because they are a cult, we've actually protected a cult. They're basically a cult that's, you know, accused of sexual abuse. I mean, you know, people have to grow up and stop being naive. Anything and everything is on the table to kill people and to gain power.
Sadly, on the right, yeah. It's this rise of right-wing nationalism, or so-called Christian nationalism, is very, very troubling. We'll be back. It's 51 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but, you know, you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. 53 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's up?
Tom, how are you? I was originally, thank you for taking my call. I was originally calling in response to your news, very disturbing news about Tucker Carlson meeting up with Viktor Orban.
Yeah, I'm going to dig into that in the next hour.
I hope you do more, because that is one of the most disturbing things I've heard. And I was thinking, before Mikey Weinstein came on, I was thinking, I wonder if Carlson is up to getting tips from Orban about how to bring the military on board to a greater degree. Well, I think Weinstein just set me on fire. I've got a fire extinguisher here beside me, by the way, thank goodness. He totally set my hair on fire. Like, the man absolutely nailed it. This is what's going on. The military is being wildly infiltrated by right-wingers and these Christian neo-fascist, I don't know what to call them, but thugs who are out to undo a great deal of what you, I, and everyone we have known for the last umpteen years, you know, that we've said about trying to correct and make better. Yeah. They want it undone.
There's no more deadly war than a holy war. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Exactly. This is insane.
Yeah.
I mean, if enough people aren't seeing this yet, then Lord help us. I mean, how do we get more people to see this with some degree of clarity? It seems so obvious to you, to me, and to a lot of other people. This is insanity happening in plain view.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm doing everything I can to just point it out to people, and you know, ultimately, I think Mikey is absolutely right. This needs to be taken on by the military itself and by our government. Nicholas, thank you for the call. Doc in Hodgesville, West Virginia. Hey, Doc, what's up?
Yeah. Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I had to get on today because I was actually building a trebuchet or a catapult in the backyard when you started your rant. And, there's too many scary similarities in the United States with what was going on in the Middle Ages. And, you know, we always see things through the lens we're aware of or what we've studied. But the worst of those is what your callers and your guests have already said. Those two words, holy war, are some of the scariest. And when we got involved over there in Afghanistan and then more, Iraq twice, holy mackerel, we just opened the door for all these guys to say, hey, let's go kill some people, and we belong over there, and now they're going to use it on us. Yeah. So, thanks for what you do, Tom. Keep it up, man.
Will do. Thank you very much, Doc. Ruth in West Los Angeles. Hey, Ruth, what's up?
Hi. I called about something else, but I just wanted to say I was, a child of the 70s in med school. My loan was $9,000. There was Sally Mae. I didn't have to pay it back till after internship and residency and fellowship, and my interest rate was really low. And I think... Yeah, exactly. I think Sally Mae's gone, and the loans are $200,000 now, or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, what I called about and what the expression "hair on fire," I just heard today, and I'm sorry if you mentioned this earlier and I didn't hear it. That the way Lindsey Graham got COVID was being on Manchin's houseboat. For a party.
Yeah, his yacht. It may be. Nobody knows for sure.
No. That was in the news. That was not rumor.
Yeah.
I mean, or at least if you can believe the news.
Yeah.
So,
Lindsey Graham and Joe Manchin. Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Yeah, Lindsey Graham and Joe Manchin. Just what we need right now. Oh my. Okay, we're going to continue. We've got a lot of show today. Charles Sauer is going to drop by on the other side of this break to try and tell us how libertarians would handle infrastructure. That's the other big story of this week. And then we'll get back to talking about Viktor Orban and Hungary and Christian nationalism.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum Diversus would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra. The book
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'm going to get into Viktor Orban and Tucker Carlson in about 15 minutes, so stick around for that. Right now on the line with us is our old buddy Charles Sauer, the libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute, the author of the book Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. MarketInstitute.org is the website. His Twitter handle, Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. And Charles, I wanted to get you on because this big story right now is these kind of dueling infrastructure bills, the $3.5 trillion one the Democrats are trying to put together through reconciliation, the one that has about $500 billion worth of new spending, they call it the $1 trillion one that the so-called problem solver Democrats and Republicans have gotten together on. And because so much of the Republican Party, particularly the intransigent faction, essentially, people like Rand Paul consider themselves libertarians, and you're a libertarian scholar. I wanted to get the libertarian take on infrastructure in America. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, first off, I think that there's multiple ways to talk about this. I don't think that Rand Paul is necessarily against infrastructure or the government involvement in infrastructure. And I've read literature that proposes the government not being involved in infrastructure or roads at all. And I would encourage everybody to read that. I would encourage everybody to read literature on all sides of all issues. That isn't the one that won me out. It's not the theory that is. In fact, one of the ex-heads of the Cato Institute wrote one of the better papers in this that shows that it's actually way more efficient for the government to build roads. I think where Rand Paul sits is when you look at any of these solutions, they're dealing with stuff way outside of just funding roads and even electrical grids, and they're providing these nuclear power plants.
Charles, your phone is fading in and out. The story that I've heard from, not just Ron Paul, but so many libertarians is that, everything, including infrastructure, should be left to the private sector. That if you're going to have roads, they should be toll roads. If you're going to have, fill in the blank. If you're going to have water supplies, somebody should be able to make a buck off it.
There's been arguments that have been made for that, but I think the predominant literature says that the government is better at running those. But we have seen productive and effective private toll roads being added in a lot of cities, including some of the cities that are working, and they help for both sides. They help people that can afford it to get out of the traffic, and the people that can't afford it have less traffic because of that. So we've seen private roads work, but if we privatize the whole infrastructure, it's not as effective or efficient for the market. And so the government is actually better at doing that. And most of the literature says that. Mr. Paul, he would likely agree with that.
Yeah, you keep fading out here. So we have physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, rail, airports, all this kind of stuff. Apparently you have no problem with the federal government being involved in that. Doesn't that disqualify you as a libertarian?
No, again, one of the past heads of the Cato Institute, one of the top libertarian think tanks, Bill Niskanen, agrees with me on that. Mm-hmm. The government has a role. It's just that the government doesn't have a role in everything that we do and needs to be limited in that role.
So what about our human infrastructure? What about our educational system, for example? You know, what I've been hearing from libertarians for years is that, you know, we shouldn't have public schools. Everything should be private. Everything should be local. Everything should be, you know, funded by, whatever. People should have skin in the game. Where are you at with this?
Well, we have a public school system, and there's nobody that can tell me that the public school system is winning right now. The places where our school system is doing good is where people have a choice to exit that system. If you look into Washington, D.C., there was an uproar when they tried to cancel the ability for parents to actually get into charter schools. That isn't like in Texas or someplace. This is a liberal bastion where people were fighting to get into charter schools, and that's because the public school system is so bad. So
I think that's a function of the property tax, Charles. This is, I mean, you know, we decided back in the 1890s when public schools in the United States really became a thing, that they would be funded by property taxes specifically, and you can go back and read the, you know, the whole, this all started in Boston. And the WASPs who were running Boston, at that time, the really poor people, the ghettos in Boston were Catholic, Irish Catholic. And they did not want those people to have good schools. The WASPs didn't. They want, and so they said, you know, the poor communities are going to have crappy schools because they're going to be funded by property taxes, and the wealthy communities are going to have great schools. And that's what you're describing in Washington, D.C. It's what we're describing all over the country. Why don't we just nationalize our schools like every other developed country in the world does, or pretty much every other one?
That's an interesting way to put fear into people's minds that racism is dominating the country. But the statistics don't. But the statistics don't follow that, Tom. If you look in Kansas City, there was more money spent per student on students in the city when Manuel Cleaver was leading the city than in the suburbs where I grew up.
Yeah, but in some cases, or in many cases, Charles, if you're coming into a school district that historically had been segregated, legally had been segregated prior to the 60s, then you've got massive problems with your physical infrastructure. You've got multi-generational problems with your educational infrastructure. There's a lot of catch-up to do. So, yeah, it costs more for maybe a generation or two. That doesn't mean that you're not, you know, you shouldn't be doing it. You shouldn't be bringing schools up to the standards of everybody else. And then on top of that, it's compounded by the fact that, again, they're still funded by property taxes.
All right. Again, you're still not working with the actual numbers, because now if we move over to Denmark, which has these things that you call for, the actual school system doesn't create equality. It doesn't do the things that you're wanting, and that's because there are different parts in society that we need to address first. Look, I've been fighting this inside the conservative movement about marijuana laws. People are scared about marijuana laws. And I've pointed out there's bigger things on our list about focusing on education, focusing on family and house lives, and correct policing. If we look at the educational system, and we can see in Denmark that the government system doesn't close the gaps, we need to look at other ways to do it, and that might be privatized. The left just at least needs to open up their minds to this. You're trying to deal with
poverty with privatizing schools. It seems like a mess to me. Anyhow, Charles, it's always nice to touch base with you, and thanks for bringing me up to date on your thinking on these issues. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Charles Sauer, his book, Profit Motive, What Drives the Things We Do. Marketinstitute.org is his website, and you can tweet him at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. We'll be right back. Viktor Orban, I got to tell you about Hungary, where Tucker Carlson is right now. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day, your calls, and what's going on in Hungary right after this. And welcome back. Paula in Miami. Hey, Paula, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Hi. I just wanted to recommend a book about God is not great. And it goes back thousands of years. And scientists were afraid to speak out about the Earth rotating around the sun. And, I mean, they would put them to death if you went against the church. It's been going on for thousands of years. So that book is a good book. God is not great. And the thing I want to say is I called Friday. I couldn't get through, but a good movie to watch about the climate change and the end of the world is The Road. It's called The Road. It came out like 10 years ago. But it's about how the fires were putting up so much smoke it blocked the sun. So the temperature dropped and nothing grew and the trees were falling down and none of the animals were alive. And to survive, they went to cannibalism. So it's like an end of the world. It's like really the end of the world. And it doesn't really say how it ends, but it just shows you that it's going to be bad if we don't get a handle on this climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Climate change has the potential to be civilization ending, and it's why we need to get our hands around this immediately. And it's so insane that we're even having a debate about Green New Deal and stuff like that. Paula, thank you for that. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, afternoon, Tom. I feel a little dumb now after doing a Google check. I heard Mikey Weinstein, and it reminded me of a story from years ago that stuck with me. It was proselytizing anti-Semitic commanding officers at the Air Force Academy. So I Google it just to check the year. I'm like, yeah, I'll mention this one case that really caught a lot of news because I lived out in Colorado for a while. And it turns out Mikey's directly connected to it. It was his son. Did you know that?
Yeah, that's how he got into it. His son joined. He was a graduate of the Air Force Academy back when it was normal.
I read up. I was doing while I was on hold. I did a quick Google check, and I was like, that one out to me as such a horrific example. But it is my number one issue for leaving the States. If I'm a one-issue voter, it's Jesus, unfortunately. I worked as a funeral director for many years. I worked with people during their religious rituals and with clergy, and had lots of great relations and had times where I just bit my tongue and walked away. But having it in the forefront, policy and definitely elections. I mean, Tom, can you name me any atheist or agnostic office holder in America?
No, it's toxic. It's poisonous. The reason why Thomas Paine only had 7 people show up at his funeral, because he published a book called The Age of Reason that defended atheism.
Yeah, no, and that's the problem. I mean, you can't even run for dog catcher in a small town in Kansas without at least slipping it in there that you love Jesus. Yeah. And I think it is the most toxic part of America. And if you look at the violence, there's 2 key points there. All of our mass shooters that have been adults, military trained, and having a specific enemy. And since September 11th, Islam is an easy way to really gin these guys up.
Yeah, it really has been. I don't know about the mass shooters, Eric, but yeah, and you know, giving these white Christian fundamentalists, oh, you can go to the Middle East and kill Muslims, and they're like, oh boy, oh boy. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we have a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. It's about this movement that has, you know, it's being characterized in the media as being just, you know, fringe wackadoodles, crazy people on YouTube, stuff like that, who are talking about how Democrats are torturing children to get the adrenochrome out of them, and Hillary Clinton is eating babies, and the ship in the Suez Canal, and how, and the really interesting one now, how if you get the vaccine for COVID, that it will change your race. Yes, something that will make white people absolutely hysterical. The problem is, this isn't just the Flat Earth Society. These aren't the people that we used to laugh at. This isn't just a few crazies on the edge. They just had a convention in Oklahoma A serious convention where they were calling for Democrats to be put in front of a firing squad and shot. You need to check this out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. So let me tell you about Hungary and why this is important and why it's just totally shocking, frankly, that the #1 star on Fox News, Tucker Carlson, is in Budapest, Hungary, doing his show from there this week. This must be what he was all freaked out about when he said the NSA is spying on me, because he was talking to the Hungarians, right? And I mean, he was just feeling guilty apparently. But Hungary became a democratic republic in 1990. They had their first election since World War II, since 1945. In 1999, they joined NATO. In 2004, Hungary became a full member of the European Union. For 20 years, Hungary was a functioning democratic republic, what the conservatives would call a constitutional republic. In 9 short years after he was elected in 2010, Viktor Orban who is now an insanely rich oligarch, has completely flipped Hungary into a fascist state, or a neo-fascist state. He took over the Fidesz party, which is sort of like, at the time, it was sort of like the Republican Party. His sales pitch when he was running for president was that he was going to restore Christian purity, and his slogan was, "Make Hungary great again." He campaigned on building a wall across the southern border of Hungary to keep out Syrian refugees. He kept that campaign promise. He actually built the wall. He altered the nation's constitution to do what we would call gerrymandering, so that his party, the Fidesz party, would always win every election, or even if they lost elections, they would still always have the governing majority in government. He's packed the courts, particularly Hungary's equivalent of the Supreme Court, so completely that every legal challenge against him goes nowhere. They have passed laws requiring what he calls conservative education in schools, particularly sex education. They teach in the public schools that homosexuality is a mental illness. They have passed laws banning any positive portrayal of LGBTQ people on television. It is against the law. They have officially conflated homosexuality with pedophilia. In fact, the latest anti-gay law was just passed last year. It passed the Hungarian parliament by 157-1. They rail against multiculturalism. He has said refugees entering the country are a threat because, and I'm quoting Viktor Orban himself, quote, "It can be problematic for different cultures to coexist." Using that logic, he was locking up refugee children in cages. Proud of it. When the Hungarian Helsinki Committee said that, quote, "the indefinite detention of vulnerable migrants, including families with small children, is cruel and inhumane," Viktor Orban came out and said Syrian refugees pose a security risk and endanger the continent's Christian culture and identity. And then echoing Trump, he said immigration brings increased crime, especially crimes against women, and lets in the virus of terrorism. Orban has handed government contracts to his buddies who are now basically, Hungary is now an oligarchy. The very, very wealthy friends of Viktor are the ones who run the country, and they're also the ones who run industry. The entire nation's press is now in the hands of Viktor Orban and his friends. There are billboards and social media postings everywhere you go in Hungary talking about how wonderful Viktor Orban is. And now he and his media buddies, his friends who have bought all the radio stations, the television stations, and the newspapers in Hungary. So basically all you get is the Hungarian equivalent of Fox News, wall to wall, all across the country. His friends, his oligarch buddies who have bought this media, the Rupert Murdochs of Hungary, are now reaching out to buy newspapers in other parts of Europe because Hungary is part of the European Union. He recently began dismantling the Hungarian Science Academy. Why? Because he says climate change was, quote, left-wing trickery made up by Barack Obama. Seriously. He blasts George Soros constantly, who was born in Hungary, with anti-Semitic tropes. He's constantly going after Jewish people. In May 2020, when Rudy Giuliani was trying to trying to get the former Ukrainian prosecutor to say that, Biden was was corrupt. Viktor Orban that week was in the White House with Donald Trump. In fact, he was one of only 2 sources of information for Donald Trump about how Ukraine was supposedly trying to sabotage his re-election attempt. Orban has completely reinvented Christianity in Hungary. He's embraced this hard right movement within the Catholic Church and among Protestant evangelicals so completely that the Central European University, which is a historically Christian university without religious affiliations, neither Catholic nor Protestant, just a Christian university, had to move out of Hungary. They got shut down and thrown out of Hungary. Their rector, Michael Ignatieff, said, quote, "There's just no doubt that this is organized as a way of saying that Christianity means white conservative Europe. It's a trope. Say the word Christian in Hungary, and it says everything else you want to say." This is what Viktor Orban was told by Donald Trump when he was in the White House. When Orban came to visit the White House, Trump said, "You have been great with respect to Christian communities. We appreciate that very much." Viktor Orban's response, "Countries that accept non-Christian or non-white refugees are producing, quote, mixed race nations." Orban is now ruthlessly using his own nation's diplomatic and criminal justice systems to backstop his criminal buddies, his corrupt oligarch buddies, having hired his own version of Bill Barr and Mike Pompeo. And his hard-right party is reaching out to white supremacist parties across Europe, supporting, the movement in France, the movement in Germany, Alles für Deutschland in Germany. In France, it's the Marine Le Pen group. Fox News is, like I said, broadcasting live from Budapest all week. We are watching the Murdoch Empire, Fox News, and Tucker Carlson openly embrace a dictator, Viktor Orban, of a formerly democratic country, small d democratic, a former Republican, small r Republican country, and presumably trying to bring this to America, this Christian nationalism that Orban bases everything on. This is insane. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
After the break, I'll pick up your phone calls. Alan Minsky will be with us briefly at the end of the hour. But other than that, it's you and me. Stick around.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided by the secret hope of discovering beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Of course, at hartmannreport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important.
Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at hartmannreport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at thomhartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at hartmannreport.com and thomhartmann.com. 35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. Hey, Brad, what's on your mind?
Have you ever heard of the books The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey?
Yeah, it came out in 1972, and I read it when it came out, actually.
Okay. And the Left Behind series by John Jenkins?
Yeah, I read about half of the first one in that series. I'm very familiar with these books.
Okay. Here's my point. When Armageddon comes in the Christian faith, the people who cause it, there is no way in my Christian belief they can go to heaven because it's antithetical to what Jesus and God's teachings are. And to me, that's an absolute. And people who wish or try to create that final world war are only serving Satan.
Yeah,
and I'll take off there.
Sure. Yeah, I get your perspective, Brad, and frankly, I share it. But if you read the book of Joshua, where God told his people to go into this city, I believe the city was Ai, and slaughter all the inhabitants, cut open the stomachs of the pregnant women, kill the dogs, cut the head off the king, and put his head on a stick in front of the city. And that was just one of, a half a dozen slaughters that are documented in the book of Joshua. You get it, that this idea of killing for God has infected at various times all three of the world's monotheistic religions. It infected Judaism way back when, and it was largely rejected by Judaism and has been for millennia. It infected Christianity with the Crusades, and it has infected Islam at various times, most recently with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And all three of these religions share that book, the book of Joshua. And by the way, that's not the only place in the Old Testament where you will find this. It's just the most conspicuous. That's why I put a link to the entire book of Joshua in my op-ed today. But I'm telling you, it's absolutely right. And this is, this Christian nationalism is a very, very, very dangerous thing. Brad, thank you for the call. Scott in Denver. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Good.
Hey, I just got a quick thing I was thinking about, and I could take my answer off there. But we got all these Republicans out there spewing, the big lie, COVID's not real, the insurrection, all this stuff, and talking about how the election was stolen and all that. Well, don't all these people, when they take their office, they take an oath, don't they?
Yeah, to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Right, and when researching what the oaths are all about, it says in here that any person that has taken this oath and takes a place in office, let's see here, I'm sorry, I just lost my place. So anyone who becomes a member of the party, becomes a member or a party of an organization, political or otherwise, that advocates for otherwise overthrowing the U.S. government by force or by violence or by unlawful means is guilty of a felony and is punishable by imprisonment in a prison.
Right.
So
that's the sedition
part of it. I mean,
yeah.
Who is not? So these people are obviously, Trump and our little Colorado crazy Colorado lady. All these people that are out there spewing these lies, and they're doing it in front of public, on TV, on the radio, in person, and they're demanding what they say is true. And we've already proven it's not true. How can they keep doing this without disqualifying themselves from being in office? from perjuring themselves?
Well, it's a good question, Scott, and you know, I was going to say, unfortunately, our Justice Department has not been willing to prosecute these kind of things, but you know, I also have some concerns about that, because had Bill Barr, you know, had the Justice Department during Bill Barr's time decided that they were going to prosecute people that they thought were behaving in a way that was un-American or inconsistent with their oath of office, they would have been going after the Democrats. So there, you know, there's this concern. I think it's a legitimate concern that Merrick Garland has, is let's not politicize the Department of Justice. This has to be first and foremost dealt with in the political sphere, which is, you know, us you know, showing up at elections and showing up with, you know, in the streets, as it were, you know, protesting and presenting our point of view. I just don't, you know, I don't think that we are going to be saved by the DOJ. Carol in Newport, Oregon. Hey, Carol, thanks for listening to KYAQ. What's up?
I am concerned about the brother of Michael Flynn, who is now commander of the Army Pacific. And Charles Flynn was in the room denying National Guard response to the January 6th insurrection.
You're right.
And he was promoted to general in 2020 in November after the election, and then was approved as commander of the Pacific in January 2021. So I just think the timing is suspicious, and I'm really nervous about having the brother of such a crazy person in our Army. I
share your concern, Carol, and when he got promoted rather than prosecuted, or at least questioned, I found it very troubling, and but you know, beyond flagging it, I'm not sure exactly what to do about that. I am hopeful that Lloyd Austin, our defense secretary, is paying careful attention to this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just worry. It feels like quid pro quo that he would be promoted so quickly and then be acting on behalf of or in Trump's favor. So, anyways, it just makes me nervous, and I just worry about all these people that have been in.
I'm with you. And when Mikey Weinstein points out that Hitler's army only had, you know, had a small percentage of people who were, you know, diehard followers of Nazism, and Stalin's army only had a small percentage, in both cases under 10% of people who were you know, completely committed to Joe Stalin as a cult figure. But here in the United States military, it's 20 to 30%. What we have to remember is that Hitler's army and Stalin's army were draft armies, and our army is an all-volunteer army, and that is, in my opinion, the danger of an all-volunteer army. Carol, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Marianne in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Marianne.
Hey, Tom. I wanted to backtrack back to Hungary and Viktor Orban.
Yeah.
I'm Hungarian descent. I have a lot of cousins still over there that I'm afraid to even email because I don't know if they're watching their emails or nothing.
Oh, they are.
But I read, I believe it was on the BBC, that Orban, who I find to be a very big hypocrite, just like a lot of Republicans, he moved George Soros's university out of Hungary, and he wants to put a Chinese one in.
Yeah, it was called the Central European University. It wasn't George Soros's. He was one of the funders, but it was I think the word is ecumenical. It was a non-denominational, not even Christian or Jewish. It was just, but it was a religiously based university. And its rector, Michael Ignatieff, said, quote, "There is no doubt that this is," as they were being thrown out of the country, this is what he said in response to it. He said, "There is no doubt that this is organized as a way of saying that, quote, Christianity, end quote, means, quote, white conservative Europe. It is a trope. Say the word Christian and it says everything else you want to say." And that university is now no longer in Hungary. So, yeah,
I think they moved to Austria.
Yeah.
But, yes, I'm afraid of it. I'm hoping they don't put the Chinese one in there, but...
Well, hey, you know, the Chinese China is basically an oligarchy right now, and that's what Viktor Orban has turned Hungary into, so it makes perfect sense. Marianne, thank you for the call. Ken in La Center, Washington. Hey, Ken, quick one.
Yeah, Tom, my opinion is that the Christian militarism started under Reagan. He opened the door to evangelicals, as well as Gene Dixon, astrologer to the stars, but he, you know, that's where it started, the apocalyptic, you know, viewpoint of these Christians who just go right to Revelations and skip all of the message that Jesus had about love and caring for others.
Yeah. And this is the problem. This is ahistoric. Ken, thank you. This new reinvented muscular, Jesus the warrior kind of right-wing Christianity has almost nothing to do with the Jesus of the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's just, you won't find him in there. But he has been reinvented as a white guy with an AR-15. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
After the break, Alan Minsky with Progressive Democrats of America, and then on the other side of the top of the hour, we'll spend the next hour discussing all these issues in more depth. Stick around. You and I. And welcome back. Francis in Seattle. Hey, Francis, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to KBCS.
Hi.
Hey.
I was just calling because you've mentioned this several times over the last few weeks, and it brings up to me how people in the North don't realize how much the South was treated like a third world country. I graduated from high school in 1973. I was at the top of a 500-person class where 3/4 of the students went to college. I had a National Merit Scholarship and a bunch of other scholarships, but my scholarships only covered less than half of my college education. So I had to work 30 hours a week because even though college was cheap in Texas, wages were really low. I never made more than a third of the federal minimum wage until I moved to Iowa after I graduated. So it just wasn't cheap. And then it also, there's other ways that the South was an example for what they're trying to do to the rest of us, to the rest of the country. Because you had a caller earlier who talked about going to medical school and it being so cheap. Mm-hmm. I went to the medical school at the same time she did. And unfortunately for me, I didn't graduate before Ronald Reagan took office. So when I started, I was one of the few people in my class that got the kind of loan they could give to poor people. Because I grew up in a house where we ran out of food before the end of the month and would have never gotten to college, to medical school without the women's movement. So despite how good my grades were. So when I started and paid to pay all this money for medical school, my terms were the same as the rich kids got. What she got was called a guaranteed student loan, 3% interest, no interest for up to 7 years if you were still in training. As soon as Reagan got in, they changed the terms on the poor students' loans, and they changed them from 3% interest to market rate interest, which in around 1980 was 12 to 15%.
Right.
And they got rid of the no accumulation of interest while you were still in training. So all the students in my class graduated after they got out of their residency with about a $20,000 debt. And my debt was over $100,000.
Wow.
So they just, people so look down on the South and say they don't want to be like the South. But the South has been, before they could take jobs out of the country, before Nixon and China, most favored trade status, the South, because they lost the Civil War, and they deserved to lose the Civil War. I'm not saying that at all, but they were treated like a third world country and just abused. I worked at the Texas Instruments plant in college because it was the best paying job I could get in Lubbock, Texas, unless I wanted to put on a bunny suit and serve drinks, which I would never do. I would have killed the first guy that put his hands on my butt. So, I tried a restaurant job once, and that's what happened, at least 3 times an hour. Yeah. So I went to work at the Texas Instruments plant. I was making slightly over half the federal minimum wage at the Texas Instruments plant, even though Texas Instruments sent stuff all over the world and was definitely involved in interstate commerce. But it just took a lot of lawsuits to make it happen.
No, and the politicians, Francis, who were most opposed to even having a minimum wage, much less increasing it, were by and large the Southern politicians back then.
That's right, because when you're treated like a third world, then it's like that Wilkinson and Pickett stuff. There's just more kiss up, kick down behavior.
Yep, absolutely. Francis, thank you for the call. We'll be right back with Alan Minsky. Stick around. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. In addition to the free newsletter that we have over at ThomHartmann.com, which gives you literally a link to every story or article I've talked about throughout the day, every day, comes into your email box every day. There's no charge. In addition to that, and my daily rants, which are free of advertising and free of charge over at HartmannReport.com, we also produce a weekly video. This week's video is about how power companies around the country, for-profit power companies 100% of the time, these power companies around the country are making it harder and harder and more expensive for people to install solar in their homes. All kinds of ways of trying to block people from doing this. And increasingly, they're getting support from Republican politicians, both at the local and the state level. It's something that we really need to know about, we need to be paying attention to, and we need to be aggressively pushing back on. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com and at HartmannReport.com. And welcome back. On the line with us is Alan Minsky, the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org. PD America is also the Twitter handle. And Alan, welcome back to the program. It's been a long time since we've talked. I've been ranting all morning about how, Tucker Carlson's doing his show from Hungary. There's an international movement to end democracy. The democracy has already been ended in Hungary. We're seeing, the complete rise of a neo-fascism or an oligarchy. I mean, I wrote a book about this, The Hidden History of Oligarchy. And there's a whole chapter about Viktor Orban in that book. I published a piece about it this morning. You guys are one of the premier organizations out there that is holding the line to try to strengthen and revive democracy in America. Tell us what you're up to these days.
Oh, absolutely, Tom, and it's so great to join you. And I do want to say this right off the bat. In fact, I have right now my opinion piece is on commondreams.org today. It is about Nina Turner. The subtitle is A Champion of the People Redeeming Our Frayed Democracy. It actually frames the Turner campaign. The election is happening today in Ohio 11th, around the right-wing efforts to suppress democracy in the United States and how she is a pro-democracy candidate. And this is obviously central to the work that PDA is doing these days. We are adamant about the necessity of, look, something has to happen in the next few weeks because the deadline for partisan gerrymandering is coming up. So this is something that we're pushing. Actually, later this week, we're going to have call-ins to members of Congress about the need to move on voting rights ASAP, because this is the first hard deadline. And yes, partisan gerrymandering is, of course, a perversion of our democracy. So, yes, that is one of the many fronts that we work on. And, Tom, you are one of the people who was there with Progressive Democrats from the beginning, and we have remained a multi-issue, across-the-board organization holding up progressive positions on really every set of issues and every facet of American life and American politics. And so, obviously, we have our priorities, but we take the full breadth of everything, and at the core is reinvigorating America as a democratic society.
Yeah, and which is basically we have two options. We can either move back to, pre-Reagan, back toward an American vision where we have a strong and healthy middle class, and the billionaires are doing just fine, thank you very much, but they don't run the show politically. Or we can move just a few more steps to the right and end up like Tucker Carlson wants us to, like Viktor Orban's Hungary, where the hard right and the Christian nationalists are running the whole damn show, and it's just amazing. You guys, we're talking with Alan Minsky, the Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America. pdamerica.org is the website and the Twitter handle. And Alan, you guys were at the forefront of the Medicare for All movement. Tim Carpenter, your predecessor, was on this program many times, just pounding on this over the years. Where are we at with that? How are we moving forward?
Well, of course, it's an absolute necessity. And, one of the things that we really have a weakness in the society, and it's getting worse and worse, is the absence of investigative journalism. But still, there's no shortage of stories, all across the United States of America, of how people are unable to get the health care they needed. They were unable to do that during the pandemic. And we have more co-sponsors up on Capitol Hill for universal single-payer Medicare for all than in any Congress. We're going to actually pass the number from last Congress, even though the Democratic caucus, of course, is smaller than last Congress. And we are also, by the way, supporting the Medicare expansion proposals that Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal are championing in the upcoming, the reconciliation half of the infrastructure.
Tell us about that.
Well, again, what the three that are on the table, and two look very likely to go through, are an expansion of Medicare to include vision, dental, and hearing, and to have that be covered by classical Medicare, so there's not the privatization wing of Medicare. So to strengthen classical Medicare, make it even more appealing to the people who have it and the people who don't, and that we feel means it works for the general movement to have it. It doesn't cut against it because more is being given and therefore we won't need it. It shows how strong it is and why people will want it. Then to have Medicare negotiate drug prices, you shall save people and the government tons of money. As you can imagine, the pharmaceutical lobby.
It's like $60 billion a year that they're ripping us off in this. You can't negotiate. Medicare can't negotiate drug prices. It's absolutely insane. We're talking with Alan Minsky, Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org. Alan, go ahead.
Well, I want to say, too, we do all of this through the most broad, dispersed citizen lobbying project in the country. It's called the PDA Congressional Liaison Project. And if you go to pdamerica.org right now, we've added a special sign-up form for listeners to the Thom Hartmann Show. If folks are interested, here's what it is. If you live in a congressional district, everybody does, and we want actual constituents to be the liaisons to their congressional offices. The project's been running up for about 6 months. I've longed for this moment to introduce this to the listeners of the Thom Hartmann Show. The first show I've brought this up in this manner to. And, because the listeners of the show really understand how our legislative process works and what we can do to be a countervailing force against corporate lobbyists. And the best weapon we have are mobilizing people. This is a part of our democratic republic that isn't being used enough. Citizens lobbying their own elected representatives. It's a brilliant program. We have multiple liaisons in each district, and we'd love for Thom Hartmann listeners to sign up. And there's a sign-up form, really simple to fill out. We'll just get in touch with you afterwards. It's at pdamerica.org. Tom, it is an honor to be with you.
Thank you, Alan. Alan Minsky, Executive Director of Progressive Democrats of America, pdamerica.org.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglass lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglass was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglass was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things,
And the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglas was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, there's an awful lot on our plate here today. We have no guests this hour. It's just you and me, so I'll be picking up your calls shortly. But I just wanted to recap for you some of the things that are going on. Ron DeSantis is out there saying, we're sick and tired of you being judgmental of us. Nobody's trying to get ill here. Right. This is the same guy who just signed an executive order forbidding schools from requiring students to wear masks, students who can't get vaccinated, students who carry COVID, students who are dying from COVID. We are one of the biggest increases that they're seeing in emergency rooms around the country relative, of the Delta variant relative to all the previous ones is an explosion of children showing up in emergency rooms. Children having to be intubated, children dying from this. We shared the story with you last week of the 5-year-old, perfectly healthy kid, died in his mother's arms of COVID. They used to joke about it as, oh yeah, COVID, it's the boomer remover. Not anymore. It's an absolute, this Delta variant is an absolute equal opportunity killer or sickener. So we've got that. Tucker Carlson and Fox News are in Hungary for a week, celebrating the end of democracy there. The oligarch Viktor Orban took over the country about 15 years ago and, completely stacked the Supreme Court, passed national, essentially gerrymandering laws so his party would never lose another election. This is sort of like in North Carolina, they more than half, and in Wisconsin, and in Michigan. More than half of the people in the state voted for a Democrat for the House of Representatives, yet their congressional representation in the House overwhelmingly Republican. They're doing the same thing in Hungary, only, nationwide. And in Nevada, this, again, over at Raw Story, just the headline kind of says it all. It's a picture of a bunch of, guys wearing militia paraphernalia. GOP's civil war in Nevada erupts into ugly scene as far-right extremists try to bully their way into a takeover. And then the Moonies, the new head of the, remember the Moonies? No, these are not the Hare Krishnas. They're not dancing and saying peace. Reverend Moon made his millions as a defense contractor. He was a weapons manufacturer, and his son still is. And his son is out there saying that the AR-15 is, an object of worship, right? And that there's a good way to die, which was my earlier rant. I mean, and then we had Mikey Weinstein on talking about how these Christian nationalists, this is a combination of white supremacy, the belief that not only are white people the ones who are supposed to inherit the earth and the United States, but that the laws should be changed, essentially. The nation should be reinvented to become a white ethno-state, which, by the way, we were up until the 1960s. black people and many other people of color had basically no rights and certainly no right to vote. And this is the direction that ever since John Roberts got on the Supreme Court with the Shelby County case where he gutted the Voting Rights Act, has been taking us back towards, is turning America back into a white ethno-state. And when you compound this so-called white nationalism, this belief in white supremacy and that only white people should run America and that America is of, by, and for white people, when you combine that with this violent Christian militancy movement that is now being encouraged apparently by the son of Reverend Moon, there's a good way to die. What you end up with is a prescription for civil war, and a particularly vicious type of civil war. And this is very, very concerning. This country was founded at least on the ideal of becoming a pluralistic, multiracial, all men are created equal society. We obviously were not that for our first 200 plus years. We have the potential to be that now. We have the potential to be that, since 64, 65 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. But the forces that brought us white ethno-state nationalism from the founding of our republic until 1965 are rising. And they are doing it with violence, they're doing it with intimidation, they're doing it with massive amounts of money. Jane Mayer was on Chris Matthews' show last night, I believe. Maybe it was with Ali Velshi. She's got a new piece in the New Yorker that is absolutely shocking, and I'm Sean is working on getting her on our program to tell you the details of it, but it is mind-blowing. I read it last night. There are all these right-wingers, and particularly some of these large right-wing foundations that don't even represent people who are still alive, right? Just, fortunes that were left, that go back to the old John Birch Society where they were all hysterical about communists in the State Department and in the military. And now they are aggressively supporting Donald Trump and these white ethno-state nationalists, the white supremacists. And it's just an extraordinarily dangerous thing for America. So that's all happening on one side. On the other side, what we're finding is that the more progressive President Joe Biden becomes, or at least in his rhetoric, and certainly there was some extraordinary stuff in the American Rescue Plan that Democrats got through Congress without a single Republican vote, that has now, as of this moment, cut child poverty in America in half over the last, compared to the last 40 years. We have started, Democrats have started the process of putting America back together. But the same billionaires and foundations and right-wing cranks who are funding the Republican Party and their efforts to turn America into a white racist ethno-state are also funding a couple of the Democratic senators and a few of the Democrats in the House of Representatives, and it's really gumming up the works. In fact, I would argue, and I have been arguing on this program now for a month, that the whole effort on the part of the so-called Problem Solvers Caucus, this came out of the No Labels group, which was created by a bunch of Wall Street billionaires. And they spun off this caucus in Congress called the Problem Solvers Caucus. And basically they danced to the tune of Wall Street and the right-wing billionaires. And of course, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are members of this. And they're putting forward this $500 billion infrastructure bill. They're calling it $1 trillion, but it's only $500 billion of new money. And much of the money that is in the bill is actually money that was passed back in June in the American Rescue Plan that is being repurposed because it never got spent. This is like with the whole mortgage thing, the whole eviction moratorium thing that, we appropriated something close to, as I recall, $15 billion, maybe a little more even, to push out to the states so that the state governments could give this money to people who are renters who are in trouble. Give it to them. And only $3 billion of it has been spent. And so we're standing on the precipice of this major homelessness crisis. Not that we don't already have one. In a country where homelessness pretty much didn't exist 40 years ago before we tried this extraordinary experiment with Reaganism and neoliberalism. So there's some real positive trends on the one hand. Progressives are doing really well. The Progressive Caucus is growing. The President of the United States is using progressive rhetoric, even if he isn't always supporting progressive legislation, but very often he is. I mean, these are things we haven't seen in 40 years from Democrats. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, boy, they're coming for us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So let's pick up your thoughts. I'll pick up your calls right after this break for the rest of the hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Lynn in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Lynn, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to call your attention to the video that's on, it's on YouTube too, it's all over Twitter, of Michael Flynn at Kenneth Copeland Evangelical Church opening up this big convention, and he is talking just like exactly what you're talking about, you know, the Christ the warrior. It's like he's indoctrinating the whole congregation. You know, they got millions of viewers on that show.
Yeah. Oh,
it's just shocking and so dangerous.
Yeah, I used to listen to Kenneth Copeland back when I was into fundamentalist Christianity in the early 70s, and he was a pretty decent guy back then. I mean, you know, he was teaching love and Jesus and all this kind of stuff, and I had no disagreement with him. And somewhere along the road, he just turned into a right-wing freak.
Yeah, I had tapes of him when I was like in the 80s, you know.
I used to listen to his tapes when I would drive. When I was working at RCA in Detroit, and it was about a half-hour commute to get to work, and I had a little cassette tape recorder that I plugged into the car cigarette lighter, and I'd listen to Kenneth Copeland tapes. I mean, that was 1972.
Yeah. Well,
boy, has it changed.
Look this video up. It's just shocking.
Yeah. Well, you know, Mike Flynn has always been a Christian nationalist, a white supremacist nationalist, and I'm not surprised. Thanks for the heads up, Lynn. It's depressing, but it's stuff we all need to know. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching us in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. That was Lynn in Tahlequah. Here's Bob in Tahlequah. What's with Tahlequah, Bob? Are you recruiting converts to watch our show? Or is it a huge town?
No, Tom, I think your show's just greatly appreciated all over the country.
Thank you.
Where
what's on your mind?
Are, exposed to it. So what's on my mind? You were talking about the situation in Hungary, and it's interesting that Lynn, that she was making the comment she was about Kenneth Copeland, who's just become a madman over the years. It's an example of what power does to you, I think.
Yeah.
But my question is, my burning question has been for a while, given that Hungary was on a pretty good track of wellness there.
For 20 years, it was a democracy.
Yeah, it was doing good. People who have fertile land and some forest left and an appreciation for the natural world can help greatly right now by just figuring on the economy, whatever that would amount to wherever you live, having something to do with maintaining the ecosystems. And my burning question about Hungary is who's going to interfere with that dictator?
Well, the EU tried twice. In 2015 and in 2018, the EU tried to issue essentially an ultimatum to Hungary saying that if Viktor Orban didn't actually hold a democratic election and give the Hungarians an opportunity to listen to the voices of the opposition, that they would reconsider Hungary's membership in the European Union. And both times the EU tried that, Orban used that to play the victim, and the result was he became more popular in Hungary. His hold on power strengthened, it solidified. The same way that, I mean, you see this with right-wing demagogues all the time. They play the victim card. They play the snowflake. Whether it's on Fox News, whether it's, Jim Jordan, or whether it's Donald Trump. Oh, the liberals are out to get us, and that's what Orban did. So I don't think that there's anybody right now who can restrain Orban. But the fact that Fox is sucking up to him, that's horrible. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. We're trying to provide the very best content that we can for you at Hartmann Report and over at ThomHartmann.com. And on Hartmann Report, every day, 6 days a week, I write an op-ed. Very often they're my rants, also for the radio and television program. And it's ad-free, commercial-free. It's free. You can sign up. It'll get pushed into your email box.
These companies support.
Check it out at HartmannReport.com. And, of course, over at ThomHartmann.com, we have our weekly video that we put up every week that, does a deeper dive for people who are members of our program, of ThomHartmann.com. And the one this week is about this Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, SIGAR, their new report that almost 20 million Afghans are on the verge of starvation and nobody's talking about it. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Well, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. MJ in Seattle. Hey, MJ, what's up?
Hey, thanks for this morning. This is bringing up some conditions and topics that I've been thinking about a lot. And I think that the 1800s was kind of a time when the United States delved into these preconditions. One of them is the genocide. We were already afflicting on the indigenous people.
Right, Native Americans. And the largest genocide in the history of the known history of the world was the American genocide of Native Americans.
It's ghastly. We've never actually acknowledged it through the government.
Yep.
And two is the belief that God wants it. Connecting those two things.
Yeah, you know what the slogan that they chanted during the Crusades was Deus Vult, which means God wills it.
Yeah, oh gosh, yeah. Well, I didn't know it in Latin, but I certainly certainly read about it and heard and picked that up through my studies. And one of the strong things about this that I want to have an opportunity to tell your listeners is that it can be historically building. In other words, people that think about the Civil War as a time when this was supposed to be worked out, and the South, who should have won, didn't win. They incorporate in their psychology a grievance. Right. And they pass it from parent to child, grandparent to grandchild, so we're seeing that too. That this is goes deeply into a family's.
It's the mythology of the lost cause, MJ, and it's what Donald Trump is trying to reinvent right now with his lost cause of his 2020 election.
Yeah, somebody behind Trump knows what they're doing.
Yeah, Steve Bannon.
And gosh, that's scary. That is a scary thought. And I want to say that there were some other things in the 1800s, but I want to jump to our contemporary times. Michael Barbaro, the New York Times has a half-hour show a day called The Daily, and they recently did a 5-series piece about how white supremacy and fascism has come back to Germany. And it is chilling, and it's come through the military, through. They used wonderful examples, histories, followed people, and.
Yeah, I heard one of those segments, and its relationship to the AfD movement, which is one of the fastest rising political parties in Germany.
Right,
it's scary stuff.
Let me tell you that my brother has been in the military since and the police department since the 1970s. He's retired now, but he has fallen off the edge of the world and become a Trump-loving supporter. And listens to Fox News only, and we're it's hard. It's hard to be estranged from him. He's the person closest to me in my life.
I'm sorry.
And
that you're estranged.
Yeah, I'm working at having some small area where we can get together again. But the deal is that these grievances, it's a litany. I've heard it coming towards me through him for years now, starting with Ruby Ridge and the Malheur takeover by the Bundys of the place down in Oregon.
Right.
And these are the causes that support the combination of religion and aggression.
Right, and these are their martyrs. These are their moments of martyrdom. Yeah, I completely get it.
That's right, and then they are willing to stand up and get in line and say, yes, I will throw myself on this. I will go to Valhalla.
Right.
And the movie The Vikings came out when I was a little kid, and we were Scandinavian like your family, and my dad didn't take us to movies. We didn't have a lot of resources, but we went to that one where we got to see Kirk Douglas catching a falcon on his arm, and and talking of Valhalla. So
I never saw it, but I've been watching the TV series, which is pretty grim.
Well, I haven't gone there because I kind of know what's going on.
Yeah, and it's very violent. It's very bloody. But,
Right. I'm here to support life and love between people, and I'm doing everything I can.
That's what we need to be doing. All right. MJ, thank you so much for the call. Good talking to you. I truly appreciate it. I see William in Austin, Texas wants to tell me that I'm a liar. William, stick around if you want. I'll pick up your call on the other side of this break. We've got a bottom of the hour break here. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, telling you the truth the multinational corporations and the hardcore right-wingers would really rather you didn't hear.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls right after this. Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using 3 simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year
some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough that 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. We try to have a lot of content over at ThomHartmann.com. We all know every day my daily rant goes up at HartmannReport.com. No advertising, no fee or anything like that. You can even get it pushed out to your email box for free. But we also have, podcasts available that are free through wherever your favorite podcast provider may be. or the full 3-hour program. It's a 1-hour podcast, the one that's free out there. There's also the 3-hour podcast available at thomhartmann.com. And we have a special video this week for supporters of the Thom Hartmann program. It's over at thomhartmann.com about the 62 worst members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Josh Hawley in the Senate. These are the people who voted against the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which passed the Senate and the House overwhelmingly. But these 62 members of the House did what is just awful. You can check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, 35 minutes past the hour. And William in Austin, Texas, it says here that you want to tell me that I'm a liar. What am I lying about, William?
Well, you're lying about a lot of things, Tom.
Pick one.
It's not just you. It's everybody. Well, Russia collusion. You lied about that.
Okay, so what is my lie about Donald Trump trying to collude with Russia to get himself elected president? What's the lie about that?
That he didn't do that. And you say
you don't think that there was a meeting in Trump Tower where Donald Trump Jr. and his friends got together with an agent of the Russian government and said who offered some help, and he said cool.
The bigger point is that you are trying to train your sycophants to accept the lies as long as the lies.
Well, I just knocked down your assertion that I was lying about Russian collusion.
You didn't knock down anything. There was no Russian collusion, and you know it. You know
okay, so what's the we'll stipulate we're disagreeing on that, William. What else are you thinking that I'm lying about?
You know that Biden extorted the Ukraine. You know these things.
No, I don't. It's actually there's no evidence of that at all. William, if we're going to just talk over each other, I'm going to hang up on you. There's no point in that. It just makes noise for people. People can't hear what you're saying. They can't hear what I'm saying. If you want to have a conversation, I'm willing to talk to you and give you all the time you want, or at least, within reason. But if you're just going to try and talk over me, like, this is some sort of Fox News SmackDown match, you're going to lose. It's not going to work. So if you want to talk about specific issues, go for it.
Christian nationalism that you're talking about. It's a lie.
You don't think that there are... Go ahead.
This is not the Crusades, Tom. This is not the Middle Ages.
No, it's clearly not the Crusades. But if you don't think that...
back to the Middle Ages is deceptive.
There are people in the United States, a lot of them, who believe that the United States is a Christian nation, which is not what the founders said, and that it should be a white nation. White people should be running it. That is Christian nationalism or Christian white nationalism. And I think it's poison.
That is not true. That is not true. I'm a white Christian.
So am I.
Okay, and I don't think we should go out and get rid of all the other people or practice that sort of discrimination.
Neither do I, William, but there are people who do.
There might be a few, but there are a few. But, your Antifa people aren't peaceful protesters either.
I am not hearing from people on the right. I am not hearing from Republican politicians that those people on the right who showed up, for example, in Charlottesville, Charlottesville, Virginia, and marched with the tiki torches and said, Jews will not replace us. And what that meant was they will not replace us with black people. The whole allegation that tripped that off was this argument that George Soros was paying to bring black people in to replace white people in their jobs, right? So this Jews will not replace us.
Very cleverly crafted liberal response.
No, I'm telling you the truth. We all saw it. And I'm not hearing, Donald Trump defended that.
No, he didn't. He said there were some good people out there and there were some bad people out there.
On both sides,
He's always said that.
That's a defense of that.
That's right. Just like when he said that we're letting criminals in the United States through the borders, y'all made it sound like he called every Mexican immigrant a killer and a rapist.
Well, he did. That's how he kicked off his presidential campaign, William. He started out by saying there.
No, sir, that's a lie. That's a
you didn't watch his
and you keep repeating it.
You didn't watch his statement when he came down the golden elevator and said, Mexico is sending us killers and rapists.
They were. Not everybody that crosses the line not everybody that crosses the border is a killer or a rapist. Everybody knows that.
Okay, so William, you're oh jeez.
He said
okay,
that
so you're
too,
going to try.
Tom.
You're just going to try and sanitize Donald Trump here. What? Why
I'm not
is Donald Trump?
sanitizing it.
Why? Let me ask you a positive here, William. What appeals to you about Trump?
What Trump was able to do with the economy, what he was able to do with the border, what he was able to do with the vaccine, what he was able to do with limiting the Marxist takeover of this country.
Okay, so let's take those one at a time. He crashed the economy.
No, he didn't crash.
I think you could argue that the
hadn't
virus crashed the economy, but, he presided over that. We had the worst economic crash since 1929.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
It just didn't happen, huh?
It did not happen. The the stock market was up, wages were up, employment was up, everything was up and then when Biden was inaugurated, things started to go south, and everybody knows it.
Oh, that's when it happened. I thought it happened back in last summer, when in March, April, May, when we started locking down. I didn't realize it. William, come on, you're living in a. And you said he's stopping. You said he's stopping the Marxist takeover of America. What Marxism are Democrats promoting in your mind?
Well, what's going on right now in New York City is a form of Marxism.
What are you talking about?
And when de Blasio says we're going to start
mask mandate to get into a restaurant,
requiring people to have a vaccine mandate.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
That's
why.
Yeah,
I don't recall Karl Marx ever writing about vaccine mandates. I do recall George Washington, I mean, not in my lifetime, but I recall reading about George Washington requiring all the troops at Valley Forge to be vaccinated for smallpox, and he would not take them unless they could show the scab on their arm proving that they had been vaccinated. Seems to me like that's the American way, William.
Well, I disagree with the vaccine part, in the part where you say that the democracy is dying.
But how is that Marxism? How is it Marxism to say that if you're potentially sick, you can't come into my place of business?
Of applying power, of using power. It's Marxist.
No, Karl Marx's shtick was from each according to his needs, to each his ability, and to each according to his needs. It was that there is no more private property, that the government owns everything, the government manufactures goods. I mean, I was in the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. I lived in Germany about 10 miles from the East German border when it was East Germany. I could tell you about how that plays out. It was ugly. And I don't think that, requiring people to show that they're not sick before they can come into a restaurant and cough on other people is that.
What about taking the vaccine and then require them to wear masks again?
Well, now that we know that with the Delta variant, even people who are vaccinated, although they're not going to get sick enough to get in the hospital or die, they can spread the disease to people who aren't vaccinated. It's a simple Christian request that the people who are protected with a vaccine protect their brothers and sisters who have chosen not to be protected with a vaccine.
The next step will be a mandate. It's always the next step is a mandate. In the Marxism part is the abuse of that central power.
Yeah, what you're talking about, William, is not Marxism. What you're talking about is some kind of tyranny, if you want to understand it in those terms. It's state power.
About Marxism
and
as
state power is
the point of a gun.
Yeah, and state and
I'm talking about Marxism at the point of the gun, which is communism.
That's government. That is government. Government all over the world. No, it's not communism. It's government. And one of the things
Marxism
that we all need to be very
is communism.
One of the things that we all when the local state government shows up at my office with a gun to tell me that they are taking over my radio show because I no longer can run a private business, then I'll agree with you. But so far it hasn't happened, and it's not happening anywhere in the United States to the best of my knowledge. This is not what you're talking about, assuming that I'm taking your worldview, that somehow it's oppressive to have the government say I have to have a vaccine. That's not communism, that's tyranny. That is the opposite of liberty.
A little step at a time. You're taking it a little step at a time.
But again, with a certain generation, you can throw around the word communism and get people to freak out and run in 16 different directions. But I don't think it works anymore. William, I hope we can have future conversations. I'm gonna move along though, because we're starting to. It's just not going anywhere here. But thank you for giving it a good try. Michelle in Denver. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
There you go, Tom. That's why we cannot get anywhere.
Why?
Is the simple fact that people in this country are pretty much ignorant to reality. Number one. Number two, convenience. Jeff Bezos is $161 billion.
Something like that.
Because rather than to get in a car or to drive or to walk to a store, we're going to go with what's convenient, and that's not going to stop, unfortunately. Rather than make sure that the local grocer or somebody else, we're going to go to a supermarket chain because it's more closer, it's convenient, they offer more online.
Yeah, well, the toxic thing, Michelle, about Jeff Bezos is not that he's offering us convenient service. I mean, that was brilliant. All he did was it's the metaverse, right? He's using Amazon. He's using the internet to do what we used to do by making, stores would try to have multiple outlets so that they would be convenient for you. But the danger, the downside of Amazon is where he's reaching out to small companies and saying, you can sell through us. And then as soon as they discover that, hey, ironing boards are doing really well, then they put the ironing board manufacturer out of business and come out with an Amazon-branded ironing board. And I'm just pulling stuff out of thin air here, but they've done it with batteries, they've done it with cables, they're doing it with all kinds of things. And that, in my opinion, is a violation of the antitrust laws that are designed to protect competition and to protect small businesses in America. And we've got some serious problems there.
Right, and I'm agreeing with that, but that's why it'll never change.
Oh, I think it could change.
Priority of we're lazy. We are the laziest nation on the planet.
Well,
I think we can change it, but unfortunately, because people prefer that over anything else, is why we are the way we are in this country. We have to have it now. We have to have it be convenient. And on top of that, people don't care. I argue with people all the time. I know people who are refusing to pay attention to what's happening, who don't believe it, who literally would rather stay in their home and tune out than to pay attention to what's going on and protest or write their congressman or go to their office.
Which is unfortunate. Michelle, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you. Thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I think that we need to be a little more precise in our languaging and our positioning here. We'll be right back. Let me talk about that. And welcome back. Let's see here. Keno in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Keno, how's the moose herders doing?
Well, I've converted to the Green Party, and I wanted to say, Tom, the future of humanity is in the hands of the German voters in their coming September elections there because of the two big problems facing humanity, global warming and the survival of democratic governments around the world. Now, these two issues come together there in Germany because the voters can choose a Green Party Chancellor Prime Minister candidate, a woman by the name of Annalena Baerbock, and she and her party want to prioritize dealing with the climate problem.
Yeah.
And I want to write a love letter to the German voters and ask them to choose Annalena for the future good of all of humanity. But my local newspaper quit publishing my letters when I converted from the Republican Party to the Green Party. They will not publish my letters anymore. Now, do you have any ideas where I might get my love letter to the Germans and plead with the Germans to vote in for this existential threat about global warming? They have an opportunity, and democracies all over the world are struggling. And Annalena Baerbock is the only one that wants to stand up to China and Russia. The two other, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats, they want to coddle and kowtow to China and Germany so they get good trade deals. And we in America need to focus on this election and give some cheerleading for Annalena. And but where can I write a love letter to the German people, Tom? You got any ideas?
I do. A friend of mine, Rob Call, started a website called opednews.com, OPEDNEWS.com. Back, geez, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, Rob started that thing. And it has become one of the better places on the internet where writers who are just, you know, getting their feet wet and fine-tuning their craft, along with, you know, experienced writers. I mean, my stuff gets published over at Op-Ed News all the time. Can get their work published. So I would suggest that you reach out to Op-Ed News and
say it again, Tom. Say the website again.
Well, you know, Op-Ed stands for opinion editorial, right? OPED, and then the word news. OPEDnews.com. That's the website.
OPEDnews.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I do not have a computer because I can't see screens, but I'll get a friend to send it in to Op-Ed News and this love letter to the Germans. And what do you think? Don't you think the German people, we should cheerlead for them because they have a chance to change the future of humanity?
I think Germany has a hell of a challenge in front of them right now, Kino. You've got Angela Merkel is on her way out, so you've got a lame duck, prime minister or chancellor, whatever her title is. You've got the Alles für Deutschland or whatever it is, AfD. This resurgent. Not quite neo-Nazi, but way to the right of the traditional right-wing parties in Germany. Essentially a white nationalist party rising up, and their main thing is trashing the Turkish Gastarbeiters, the Turks who came there after World War II to help rebuild the country, and their children and grandchildren. And then on the other hand, you've got a growing left wing in Germany that has been, you know, was instrumental in taking Germany off nuclear power. They're going to decommission their last nuclear power plants in the next few years, and the 100,000 rooftop program. And I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff going on in Germany. There's a lot of scary stuff, and I think they're kind of a microcosm of the world. So yeah, I get it. Yeah, and the Green Party is filled with vitality in Germany because they have a parliamentary system where you can have multiple parties participating, unlike the United States. So, Kino, check out my friend Rob Call's website. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Well, the Confederacy continues to live. Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, just signed a proclamation making April the Confederate Heritage Month in Mississippi. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that it didn't get published on the state's websites. It got published over on Facebook, where there's a good contingent of racists and neo-Confederates to begin with. But what does this say about America, that a part of the country that literally was a police state, a fascist police state, there was no democracy left by 1861 in the South. It was completely controlled by a few thousand families who owned these massive plantations. And in my little riff that's over at ThomHartmann.com for the supporters of our program, I go through some of the details of it. You know, just the sad, sad history of the South. It is really worth checking out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Rick in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good to talk to you. Thanks for taking the call. You talk about a Christian nationalism, a white Christian nationalism in the military. Mm-hmm. I don't think that exists in the sense that it isn't provable. You're simply chasing an idea that no one can prove they believe.
Yeah, actually, it does exist. It is provable, and I would encourage you to go to militaryreligiousfreedom.org and check it out. You'll see what I'm talking about. Mike in Minneapolis. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Take my call. I wanted to move back into the world, part of the world where Hungary is, and Viktor Orban. But I want to talk briefly about the neighbor to the north of Hungary, which is Slovakia, which is the land my grandfather and great-grandfather came from.
It's Melania Trump's home country, too, isn't it?
No,
that's
no, I think
Slovenia.
she's
I always mix
Slovenia.
that up. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Slovakia is the one with the K. But at any rate, 903 in history, the year 903, was when the Huns, the Hungarians, invaded Slovakia.
Were the Huns the Hungarians? I thought the Huns were Asian.
No, well, it was. I believe that the Huns were settled in that part of the world, and that's where they came to when they invaded Rome and everything else. They may have come from Asia originally. In fact, the Slovakians may have come from Asia originally, in the northern part of Asia, and due to some disaster, moved down there.
I confess, I know almost nothing about that time or that period, that area. So, continue educating me, Mike.
All right. Well, anyway, so the Huns, the Hungarians, put us through all of the problems. One of the biggest one was having Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracul, which is where the legend of Dracula came from. And Slovakia was a pretty fertile killing ground for Vlad.
Was Vlad a Hungarian?
Days. Yes, he was. So, at any rate, while they were there, Slovakia finally became a nation in, what was it? It was in the 1990s. I think it was 1994, when they split apart from the Czech Republic, and so they finally became their own nation. Ever since they did that, one of the very first acts that they did was close the border with Hungary. And it remains closed to this day.
Because, by the way, Vlad the Impaler was Romanian, but so was that because of Orban?
Well, it was not because of Orban, but it was because of the history that they've had under Hungarian rule, the whole Austro-Hungarian Empire thing, all of the requirement, the cruelty they were treated with. They began, when they closed the border, repatriation of Hungarians, all Hungarians in Slovakia. And I believe as of 10 years ago, that's the latest figures I have, they had it down to 57,000 people. But I think looking at what came with Orban and everything else, even though they got in trouble with the European people because of not letting the Arabians come in a couple of years ago, but that was, they could get in the other borders, but they couldn't get in the Hungarian border.
Interesting. Mike, I'm sorry, we're out of time. We're just flat out of time. It's the end of the show, in fact. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require all of us. That includes you. We need to participate. We really need to participate. pdamerica.org. Check it out. And thanks again for being with us today. We'll see you tomorrow. Tag You're It. Get out there and get active and be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.